Donald Trump's peace plan for Ukraine underwent significant changes after negotiations in Geneva. This was influenced both by Ukraine's position and by Europe's counterproposal. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has already stated directly that there will be no peace plan unless all the wishes of Ukraine and Europe are taken into account. In this episode, I propose we discuss the key events around the peace plan before and after the Geneva meeting, and what to expect next. Let's put together all the pieces of what the plan was like in the beginning. How did Donald Trump try to push Ukraine towards surrender? What did Europe eventually propose? And what does the peace plan look like now after the talks in Geneva? And we'll also talk about a separate document that Ukraine and the United States agreed on yesterday, but which the media isn't talking about right now. There is a peace plan, and there is also another document that is very, very important for Ukraine, but it isn't really being covered right now. We'll discuss all this in detail next. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give a like, and leave any comment under this episode. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. The day before, Ukraine and the United States issued a joint statement after bilateral talks in Geneva on November 23 about achieving peace. The parties stated that they have prepared an updated and revised framework document on peace. The meetings were attended by United States Secretary of State Mark Rubio, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, United States Army Minister Dan Driscoll, who recently visited Kyiv, and Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner. Ukraine's delegation was led by President's Office head Andrei Yermak and National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov. The joint statement notes that any future agreement must fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty and ensure a lasting and just peace. Kyiv and Washington agreed to continue intensive work on joint proposals in the coming days. They will also maintain close contact with European partners as the process moves forward. The final decision on this framework document will be made by the presidents of Ukraine and the United States, after which this plan will be handed over to the Russians. United States Secretary of State Mark Rubio stated after the talks that this was the most productive day in all the time of cooperation for peace, although he admitted that the work is still ongoing. At the same time, he noted that the parties have significantly reduced the list of unresolved issues, and the plan itself has been shortened from 28 to 19 points. United States President Donald Trump himself, who initially set a deadline to reach an agreement with Ukraine by Thanksgiving on November 27, has now extended it. He described this deadline as tentative. He stated that this plan is not a final proposal. Mark Rubio stated in turn, quote, he noted that the deadline for Ukraine to sign the peace agreement set by the United States President can now be postponed. So, what was agreed upon in Geneva? No official details have been provided yet by Mark Rubio, the White House, or the President of Ukraine's office regarding any progress made in the negotiations in Geneva. However, according to sources, the parties managed to agree on most of the provisions of the United States plan and were able to adjust a significant part of the disputed points. Among them are the issue of the size of the armed forces of Ukraine, the issue of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the format for prisoner exchanges, and the return of convicted persons. However, the points concerning territories and enshrining Ukraine's non-accession to NATO in the constitution were agreed by the delegations to be left out of the discussion. They will be discussed and agreed upon by Presidents Zelensky and Trump. Their meeting could take place as early as this week or next week. Not this week. Sources say it's not planned. It's most likely happening next week. Columbia Broadcasting System News reports a potential Zelensky United States visit is under discussion, with the date depending on negotiations. What did Ukraine propose during the Geneva negotiations? Ukraine is known to have a counterproposal for the American side. And now, two Axios sources familiar with the negotiations in Geneva reported that the optimistic statements by Rubio and Yermak came just a few hours after a tense meeting. They say, during the meeting, the American side accused the Ukrainians of leaking negative details of this plan to the American press. They asked why you let Witkoff and Dmitriev's peace plan reach the press. The Ukrainian delegation supposedly agreed to publish a positive statement from one of their negotiators afterward to somewhat smooth over the situation. Later that day, Ukraine offered a counterproposal requesting changes to Trump's plan. In return, the United States expressed readiness to make some changes based on the Ukrainian counterproposal. And as is known, Ukraine's counterproposals were coordinated with Europe, and we'll talk about that further. And now we move on to the question: what is the essence of the United States plan, and what are Europe's counterproposals? According to the original version of the 28-point peace plan, which Vitkov, Rubio, and the Russian Dmitriev have been quietly working on over the past month, Ukraine in particular would have had to reduce the size of its armed forces to 600,000, to give up Donbass, agree never to join NATO, and accept full amnesty for Russians suspected of war crimes. But it's important to note that besides this plan, there is another additional document called the Framework Agreement on Security Guarantees for Ukraine, which, as stated in its text, is modeled on the principles of Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This framework agreement, which for some reason is not being discussed publicly right now, contains 3 key points. The President of the United States can use military force, intelligence, logistical support, economic and diplomatic measures, and other actions he deems appropriate in the event that Russia attacks Ukraine again. Furthermore, NATO, as well as France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, and Finland, commit to act in coordination with the United States in the event of aggression against Ukraine. The framework agreement lasts 10 years and can be extended. This document is very interesting, and if adopted as is, it seems to offer clearly defined security guarantees. But the Europeans have put forward their own counterproposals in which they reject several of the conditions of the United States plan. As the Telegraph writes, these proposals include limiting the number of Ukrainian armed forces personnel to 800,000 in peacetime, with more allowed in wartime. Ukraine's NATO membership should be decided by the bloc's consensus, not the Kremlin's wishes. Among other things, Ukraine receives financial compensation, in particular from Russian assets, which will remain frozen until Moscow fully compensates Ukraine for the damage caused. Kyiv promises not to return the occupied territories by military means. Negotiations on territorial issues will start from the line of contact, and only after the ceasefire will Ukraine hold elections as soon as possible. After signing the peace agreement, Ukraine will receive security guarantees from the United States similar to NATO's Article 5. For instance, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War say the Russian Federation still rejects all peace proposals, including the original 28-point United States plan, which does not meet Moscow's long-standing demands for the destruction of Ukrainian statehood and the weakening of NATO. At the Institute for the Study of War, they openly admit to dodging. They will play around with this plan again, they will find some points they disagree with again, and in the end, they will still reject it. And analysts assess that Russia is unlikely to accept any peace plan that does not involve the actual capitulation of Ukraine. So, as they say, this is just the start of the journey to long-awaited peace. I'll put an ellipsis here. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.